The Untold Adventures of Biao. Season 1. Episode 26. Mr. Gong just finished speaking when a giant rat in the corner of the house poked its head out, seemed to receive the order and immediately ran away. After a few minutes, hundreds of rats gathered around Mr. Gong. He said a few words to them, and then they quickly scattered everywhere to find the crooks who harmed him. In this vast, hilly, forested place, there was no place without rats. There was no place that rats could not find. Less than an hour later, the rats discovered a person lurking in a murky house, performing witchcraft. This person had a thin body, gray skin, seemed to be a shaman of Miaoging. He wrapped a string across a doll's head and smiled wickedly, muttered something as if he cast a spell. While he was focused, the door behind him opened. Mr. Gong entered with a fierce look. That guy didn't know how Mr. Gong found here. As soon as he saw Mr. Gong entered, he quickly stood up and protested. He grabbed the knife on the table and rushed towards Mr. Gong. How did you find this place? Go to die. Just a small knife couldn't reach Mr. Gong. He tilted his head slightly to the side, dodged the knife, and then approached the shaman with a serious face. My patience has a limit. Who are you? Why do you want to harm me? Don't let me repeat it again. The shaman saw Mr. Gong simply dodged the knife. Knowing that his opponent was a master of martial arts, it would be difficult to deal with. The shaman stepped back toward the black jar in the corner as if he had a plan. You must die. I will let you know the power of the Miaoging evil worm. It was true that Zhang Bai stepped back to the jar on purpose. He knocked over the jar, and then countless strange-shaped evil worms crawled out. These evil worms had a disgusting appearance. Their mouths were full of tentacles fluttering in the air. The body seemed to have a shell like a snail, but below was a soft body with an articulated tail. They pulled the whole herd to rush, jumped towards Mr. Gong like a flood. However, this did not make Mr. Gong scared. It made him even angrier. He shouted 3 words, "You find death. Go ahead," not leaving any. As soon as Mr. Gong finished speaking, hundreds of giant rats were also gathered from the door right behind him. The rats rushed in to bite and tear the evil worms. In just a moment, the whole house was a battle of hundreds of mice and evil worms. The rats constantly hissed and rushed to bite the evil worms. The scene in the room was extremely chaotic, with the cries and bites of rats. It seemed that the worms were no different from the prey for the rats. The scene looked like a feast for the rats, but it was hell for the worms. The bodies of the evil worms being bitten and strewn looked disgusting. These worms, cultivated by Zhang Bai for a long time, have now become delicious prey for the rats of Mr. Gong. Zhang Bai stood and watched, dumbfounded. Before Zhang Bai could regain his composure, Mr. Gong came right in front of him. No need to look anymore. The mice of Miaoging land don't know how to cultivate. My rat came here to be their king. And not only that, the spirit mouse of Mr. Gong was cultivated for a long time. Coming to this land of Miaoging, it became the king of rats and helped Mr. Gong. Not only that, right after the words of Mr. Gong, a long black shadow appeared from behind Zhang Bai. Zhang Bai turned his head and found a giant, ferocious red snake with sharp iron teeth. The fact that the snake opened its mouth to bite him and the smell of carrion coming out of its mouth made Zhang Bai so scared that he even couldn't stand. Before the snake had time to move, an old woman suddenly appeared at the back door, dressed in Miaoging's clothes, making everyone stop. Mr. Gong immediately asked who she was. That woman complimented Mr. Gong that he was so young but having extraordinary skills. No wonder why. If she was young, she couldn't help but into him. Mr. Gong also soon guessed that it was impossible to be followed and murdered for no reason. Surely there was something hidden behind. But this old woman said roundabout and still did not answer his question. She mumbled a few incomprehensible sentences. The conversation between the two of them made Mr. Gong was even more confused. It turned out that Zhang Bai harmed him out of jealousy. But it's unclear why he was jealous of Mr. Gong. I don't agree. How can a Miaoging lady get married to a Han person? The person that Zhang Xing should marry is me. It can't be him. The face of the old woman hardened. She told him that let this red snake bite him to death. She didn't need a son-in-law as incompetent as him. What marriage did they say? Why was there even a daughter-in-law here? Mr. Gong listened to them silently, but the more he listened, the more he couldn't understand what it was. Mr. Gong, at this time, did not want to care much. He just wanted to know the reason why he was murdered. According to his many years of experience, what he did not understand, then should not try to participate. Especially if it was the love stories in the family of those who possess this mystical magic. Seeing that the old woman seemed a dangerous character, Mr. Gong then said a word and was about to leave. I don't know what you guys are talking about. Anyway, it has nothing to do with me. My work is done, goodbye. Then, the old woman in the back whispered a few words slowly, which sounded like not touching the people of the Feng Ling family in Miaoging. These words made Mr. Gong couldn't help but stop listening. His intuition also noticed that there was another person outside. He turned his head to look. The Miaoging girl entered. Mr. Gong immediately froze when he saw her. His heart was full of tough questions to answer. Why was she? Why was Miaoging? She was supposed to live at the foot of the mountain. Mr. Gong froze. The Miaoging girl apologized and said that she was Miaoging. Her last name was Feng. This girl was such a beautiful woman, just like a fairy. She wore makeup and Miaoging clothes. What's happened between her and Mr. Gong? Speaking of that, Mr. Gong suddenly stopped, as if he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He changed the topic to the surprise of Biao and Fei. In short, that day, I saved the life of Zhang Bai. As a result, he continues to harm people until nowadays. That's a mistake. After saying that, he wore a bored expression and continued walking. Biao and Fei, who were listening deeply, were suddenly interrupted by a change of topic and cut off their emotions. After a while, Biao regained his senses, remembered there was a beautiful girl, curiously asked who that person was. Oh my god, there's even an amazing Miaoging lady. What a shocking secret. Dad, who is that, Dad? It turned out that you. Mr. Gong, at this time, silently continued to walk home, despite Fei and Biao noisy asking behind. Dad, you're so bad. It's been a long time, but you still haven't told me about my mother. That pretty girl is my mother, right? What happened to my mother? I really want to hear. That's right, Mr. Gong, don't tell just a half. Please tell us the full story. Did my mother do something violent to you in the past that you do not dare to tell? Fei and Biao kept asking questions out of curiosity. But Mr. Gong was the one. If he didn't want to tell, no matter how much be asked, it was useless. He shouted angrily, "Get out!